December the 1st, 1981. We are at the home of Mrs. A.F. MacDonald, Dorothy Boyd, and Tom Boyd, and myself. And Mrs. MacDonald, how are you today?
Well, thank you.
Great. How many years have you been living in North Battleford?
Lived here since 1913.
1913. That's a good many years. Do you remember the first day you came to North Battleford?
I remember very well. I would like to go back and tell you why I came to the West. Again, when I was at university, a number of my friends would come out in the summer and teach on the prairies to earn money to go to college the next year. And they had such flowing tales of the things they had out here that I decided I'd like to come west. For my parents, I was the only child, and they decided that I was coming west, they were coming west too. So my father came west, and he was superintendent of inspector school, as they called it then, for North Battleford. And I don't know how this came about, but a lady teaching in Fifth Current wrote me and asked me if I would take her class for September to Christmas. In those days, you could teach on a certificate. Tell them to phone later. You could teach on a certificate before you went to normal. And they would hold her position if she would get her own substitute.
Oh.
So I went and taught in Fifth Current on the certificate from September till Christmas. And there I taught grade, well, it was a nondescript grade 8 in a Baptist church, and the mice used to play around my feet. However, that was all right. And I had grade 9 Latin and history. Well, then, after Christmas, I went to normal. In the meantime, my mother and father moved up here. And I went to normal in Regina. And toward the end of the term, I accepted a school at Home Lake. And Dr. R.A. Wilson was principal of the normal school, and later he became professor of English at the University of Saskatchewan, a very fine man. Mr. Thomas, who was treasurer secretary of the school board here, phoned Dr. Wilson and asked him to recommend a teacher. And he asked me if I would come. And I said, no, I can't. I've accepted the school at Home Lake. And he said, I'll get somebody at Home Lake to do for North Battleford. So that's how I came to North Battleford, on his recommendation. And there was King Street School, and there was the annex on the back, two-room wooden building, which I think later was moved and became the school board building, and I think now it's the art center. And all the other classes were scattered all over town. We won the parish hall. The public school board rented 2 rooms. The Catholic school was a 4-room school, and 2 sisters teaching upstairs. And the public school board rented 2 downstairs rooms. And I had a class of, well, they were just everything. People were moving in, and these children didn't know where to put them. So it was like a country school, you see, grade 2 up to 6 or 7. Well, that lasted till the end of June.
That was in 1913.
That was the 1913.
That was the year North Battleford became city.
Yes.
Do you remember the year?
Yes, I do. I remember marching the children down later to by what now is the park, by the United Church. And some celebration downtown. I forgot what it was. But a lot of people came out here and taught to get a start in life. C.S. Walker was principal of schools here, and later became a lawyer. Mr. McIntosh taught here in Regina.
Mr. Walker became the first mayor of the city.
Yes, that's right. And I've forgotten another one I thought of this morning. Anyway, maybe I'm coming. But when I came back in the fall, they put me in the school post office stand. And when the wind blew, it went like this. And Miss Isla Pentland had the primary class, the downstairs, and I was upstairs. And it was the worst fire trap you ever saw. We went up 12 steps, and then the landing, and we turned and went up 3 more. We never would have got the children out than the fire. So I was there for 2 months, I think. And then the Cairn School, collegiate, was open. And the public school board rented 4 rooms there. And I moved up to King Street, and that's where I stayed, where I taught. It was over. Well, then in 1914, Mr. Thomas came to see me one morning before I had my breakfast, in fact, and he said, they've let the Latin teacher, collegiate, go. Would you take the Latin class after 4? And I said, well, I'd have to consult Mr. Lawrence, who was going to go to school, and see if he'd be willing for me to leave exactly on 4. You were supposed to stay till the children got off the playground, but so it was stable about 5 o'clock, you know. So Mr. Lawrence said, that's all right, we'll fix that up. So I went over to the collegiate every afternoon. I was supposed to teach 11 and 12, but 11 wasn't quite so important. These pupils in grade 12 all wanted to go to university, and they couldn't go to university in those days without Latin. So they were very keen to learn. It was R.V. Mills, Mrs. Boyd, Bertrand Fleet, one of the walkers from Nolan. I don't remember his first name. I think he later became a professor at some university.
O.J.
And then Mr. Anderson, who
Okay. Now, Mrs. MacDonald, you give us your second chapter.
Is it on?
Yeah, go
If I start to speak, it'll record?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think something should be mentioned here about my father's experiences. He was, in those days, they called them school inspectors, not superintendents of schools. And his district reached from Lloydminster on the west to the river on the east. I forget how far south it went. But to Meadow Lake and beyond, as far as there were schools. And before cars, he had to drive a horse and buggy. And often he would be away from home 3 weeks. And driving into Meadow Lake, it was a corduroy road over a muskeg. And sometimes he had to sleep in the schoolhouse. Sometimes the trustee would take him home to sleep.
Mrs. MacDonald, may I interrupt this for a
Yes.
moment? What was your father's name?
Dr. McGee,
Dr. McGee?
Dr. W.H. McGee.
Dr. W.H. McGee. Okay, continue.
And as I said, he'd be away from home sometimes 3 weeks at a time. So life wasn't quite so easy. Later, when cars began to get numerous, he got a car and could drive properly. But it was a huge territory. And I remember him telling me about a school near Meadow Lake being inspected. And he asked the children to tell him the provinces of Canada. And none of them could. But everyone knew the states of the Union.
Oh, that's unreal. That's right.
There were a lot of American teachers. About how many schools would there be in that big area? Oh, there was a lot. And then when winter came and you couldn't get out in the country, there was a short normal school course every winter. And you used to go to Prince Albert to teach a knit. And when we came to North Battleford, people didn't know what a PhD was. It was called Dr. McGee. He was a PhD from Cornell University. And they'd say, well, he doesn't carry a little black bag around. He's not a doctor. They'd ask my son why he was caught. What was his major? Chemistry.
So, now, Mrs. MacDonald, where were you born?
I was born in Truro, Nova Scotia, to Annapolis Royal Academy and at Dalhousie University. I might say that my hometown was, I was only in Truro till I was about 2 or 3 months old. And then my mother and father went to Ithaca, New York, for him to get his PhD. I was only 3 months old when I went there, but I have no recollection of that, of course. But Annapolis Royal, as it's called now, was the first white settlement north of the Virginias in Canada. That's why it's so interesting. The old fort is still there. So I kind of was grown up with history there. It was quite a French settlement around there.
It's so beautiful in that
Yeah.
part.
So you came to North Battleford in 1913, the year we became a city. And have you been here ever since?
Yeah.
And you taught how many years?
2.
Just 2 years. Were you married? Was that prior to your marriage, or?
Oh no, people didn't teach after they were married in those
Oh.
days. It was kind of frowned on.
Uh.
And I don't suppose I would have anyway.
No. So when were you married?
In 1915.
1950. And could you tell us your husband's name and his occupation?
My husband was Mr. MacDonald of MacDonald Lumber Company, which later sold out to the Beaver Lumber Company.
I see that's history too. Was he in business when you met him? When you were?
He came here at the same time I did.
Oh, he did.
In fact, we'd been in Swift Current together but didn't know each other.
Oh.
As he was traveling out of Swift Current then. He put in yards to the Beaver Lumber Company at St. Walburg and Rabbit Lake, and then it was run Glenbush, Turtleford, and he supervised those after they got home.
And how long did was he involved with the lumber yard? Do you remember when he retired?
I don't think I can tell you the exact date.
No, but in the 60s, 70s?
He retired when he was 65, and he was born in 87.
Oh. That's fine. Okay, now,
I know we celebrated our golden wedding, yes.
If I were to ask you, Mrs. MacDonald, what is the most interesting experience you had, or the one that will stay with you the longest of your early days in North Battle?
I think walking through the mud they told me June was the rainy month, and it certainly was a rainy month that first year. And no sidewalks, or just sidewalks downtown. And you'd walk through mud halfway up your legs to get to school. It rained, I think, every day.
And skirts around your ankles.
Yes, I expect so. I've forgotten that.
How do you think that the education system, because you are a teacher, were interested in the early history of school? In fact, I've been working on some of that myself. What does it compare? How does it compare with today's standards? You know, things have changed dramatically. But
Well, I feel that, for one thing, they don't teach children. I don't think they have memory work anymore. We always, when we started school in the morning, opened with mental arithmetic, which was supposed to keen your mind up for the day, and you learn poetry off the heart. You learn some prose off the heart. Well, I think that trains your memory. I think that's one reason my memory is as good as it is. I certainly had to learn a lot of poetry in my day.
fine.
But I don't know much about the system now because, of course, my children are grown up and I don't know much about what my grandchildren have learned because they didn't live here.
Well, we don't stress phonetics like we used to. You know, it's like English. However, no. Can you tell us about some people you knew in those days? I mean, people your own age in business or what they were doing, or names that...
Well, during that time, we started the Women's Canadian Club here. And I think the chief people who were interested in starting that were Mrs. Herbert and Mrs. Bodden, and I think Miss Jakes from the mental hospital.
And Mrs.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Mrs. Hurlburt would be the doctor's wife.
Mm-hmm. And I was president of that 1 year, 2 years, I forget what years they were. And we brought in speakers from, well, from all over the world. I remember we had a speaker from Finland, a very nice young man, and he was so distressed that day because the day he was to speak to us was the day the Russians marched into Finland. And he could hardly talk that night.
Now, do you remember any other organization like the Red Cross or their
I worked
activities?
as secretary of the Red Cross for quite a number of years during the Depression. And at that time, the Red Cross here handled all the welfare work for the North. And each appeal meant 4 letters. First, they wrote an appeal to the Red Cross here, and then I had to write back to somebody in the municipality, the reeve or the teacher, to find out if it was a worthy case. Then the letter had to be forwarded with it to Regina, and then they wrote when the parcel was sent, and you notified the people. And that was a lot of writing, and I didn't have a typewriter. It was all written by hand.
How about any other organizations that you belong to? Are there any other organizations you're involved with?
Well, as I say, there was
Yes,
the Red
Red
Cross,
And
and
the Training
the
Club.
club, and then the University Women's Club that
Yeah.
started the last year of the war, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And you've been a member ever
I was
since?
a charter member of it.
Charter member. And you're still a member?
Yes. And then I was president of our United Church, well, it was, yes, United Church WA for a couple of years. Till my husband retired and we went west for the winters.
Okay, now we're going to let you have a rest. Okay, ask these questions. You should stay down, you know.
Mrs. MacDonald, do you remember when you went on the library board?
No, I don't remember the date.
Well, no, in the decade.
Do you remember or who was the chairman of the board when you... Was it Ariel Sallows?
Yes, I think it was. I can figure out the date. It was the year Jean was in Mr. Who was the teacher that she was in grade 8, and she was born in 23. She'd be in grade 8 when she was... That's not recorded.
Mm-hmm.
Is it?
Yeah.
I don't think so.
Well, that's all right. That's all right. That's good. There's nothing wrong with that at all.
That's the way you figure out things.
Oh, sure. And the children are born. Yeah. So that would be the 20, in the 20s.
Probably around 27, right?
Yeah. Either.
Oh, no, she wouldn't be in
Oh,
grade 8.
no. No. Oh.
She'd be 5 when she went to school, and grade 8 she'd be ready for 3 to 13 years. 23, 33, about 37, 38.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay. The end, late 30s. When you were. Okay.
And Mrs. Sarah was on it, and I forget who else. Always and Mr. Vick. They always seem to have a bank man as treasurer. And it was Mr. Erlinson who was so good about the children's library.
Yeah.
He was, I was always trying to get the children's library started, and well, just didn't have money. And Mr. Erlinson patted me on the shoulder one day and he said, "Never mind, I'm putting a little away every month toward the children's library." He was an awful nice man.
And that's how they got the...
Well, eventually
library
then
down.
some of the societies helped, greatly. And they couldn't have done And Mrs. Curry was wonderful in planning that. She did all the planning of the arranging. Well, I haven't been to a library for years like this, you know.
Okay, you were in the library in the late 30s, and it was really the same size as it is today, wasn't it?
Yes, and we used to
Hasn't
worry
it?
then that the stacks of books would break the floor down. They were so heavy, and I dread to think what it must be like now.
That's exactly right, isn't it? I mean, here, the library was overcrowded in your day, in the late
Yes.
30s, and now here we are in the 80s, and we have the same space, with the exception, of course, of the children's section. It's down, built down the
Yes. They used to rent that. That section was
Yeah, the hall.
the Rotary Club used to have their luncheon there, and it was brought over from the cafe. And Mrs. Frank Wright was chairman. I was wrong, but earlier it was Mrs. Frank Wright. And in bringing the lunches over, they brought cockroaches with them.
Oh, dear.
And I remember Mrs. Wright and I going down to the kitchen one day and scrubbing and cleaning and putting poison in to kill these cockroaches. And the floor in what was then the assembly hall that they used to rent to make a little extra money was paid for in advance by the Rotarians as a rental for their new luncheon. So that's how we got the hardwood floors.
Floors.
So there was all kinds of conniving to get things done.
Well, that's where the Canadian Club used to meet too, didn't they?
Yes.
They had a lot of public meetings down in the library hall.
Oh yes, they loved to rent it because I think they rented for $5 a night, you know. And at that time it was heated from the powerhouse.
It would be hot, and they'd open the windows, and then a train would go whistling by when somebody was speaking.
Yes, and then children to break the windows, we had to put wire all around all the windows.
Well, I know the University Women's Club in '67 recommended an addition to the library as a centennial project.
Yeah.
And then the Arts Council have been trying to work on it since then, and we're still sitting, waiting.
Now this is being recorded. I would like to tell you something that I don't want recorded.
Oh, okay.
Now, Mrs. MacDonald, getting back to, this is, I think you'd probably call this third installment. Okay. Now, what do you think should happen about our library situation, about our art center that isn't large enough, our library isn't large enough, we have no center of the arts? What do you think the solution is?
Well, I really don't know that I'm capable of suggesting a solution, but I would certainly hate to see the Carnegie Library torn down or put to any further use. I think, as Mrs. Boyd suggests, it would be a very good thing to keep it as a branch library for the senior citizens. And I would certainly hate to see Kieran School torn down, the old collegiate. We let our post office go. Battleford has certainly preserved their buildings much better than North Battleford has.
Why do you think that is?
When you go to England and live in a hotel that was built 400 years ago, you realize how they have valued their buildings. We stayed in a hotel at Stratford that had been there 400 years. It was fire trap and it.
Well, I think I'd agree with you. Okay, now do you have any thoughts you would like to leave with us, Mrs. MacDonald?
You've got enough of
Well,
me.
thank you very much. It's been a pleasure talking.